Back in 2002, and ever since the study came out shortly after we started this radio program and now a radio and TV program. But back at that time, I've been talking about this constantly because it just blew my mind when it came out. The BBC reported on the science of the relationship between political decisions, who's in power, who are the political decision makers, and rates of national suicide among the people. The headline, the BBC headline in this article in 2002 was "More Suicides Under Conservative Rule." And we're talking the friggin' BBC here. This is, they're not polemical. They're not political. This was not an editorial comment. This was an actual article, a news story in the BBC put up on their website. It was, run as a news story on the broadcasting service, radio and TV. The first sentence of the article said, and I quote, "The suicide rate increases under conservative governments. The suicide rate increases under conservative governments, research suggests." And then they talk about how they looked at virtually the entire 20th century, from 1901 to 1998, in both the UK and Australia. There was an impact that World War II had on suicide rates in the United Kingdom, and it caused them to go up. And there was an impact that droughts had in Australia during the 20th century, where it wiped out family farms and people committed suicide. But as the BBC reported, after adjusting for these factors, the figures clearly showed the highest rates of suicide occurred when both conservative state and federal governments were in power. End of quote. They also looked at what happened when the Liberal Labour Party, the equivalent of our Democratic Party, was in power. The conclusion reported by the BBC, quote, "Conversely, the lowest suicide rates occurred when state and federal governments were both Labor." In other words, like Democrats. They were able to actually pretty tightly pinpoint the numbers. Here's what the BBC reported. When the Conservatives ruled both state and federal governments, men were 17% more likely to commit suicide than when Labor was in power. Women were 40% more likely to kill themselves. Why might that be? The BBC cited the researchers as saying, conservative rule traditionally implies a less interventionist and more market-oriented policy than Labor rules. This may make people feel more detached from society. End of quote from the BBC, quoting these researchers. Conservatives also make the rich richer and the poor poorer, which increases suicide rates. The BBC ended their article with these two very classically British, understated, dry, blunt paragraphs. Quote, this is the end of the article. BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, end of the article. Overall, they say, the researchers that looked at the entire 20th century, overall, they say, the figures suggest that 35,000 people would not have died had the Conservatives not been in power, equivalent to one suicide for every day of the 20th century, or two for every day that the Conservatives ruled. The UK Conservative Party refused to comment on the research. Duh! The Arab Spring began with a very public suicide of a street vendor in Tunisia. Soon after that, the government of Tunisia had fallen, and then Egypt, and then Libya. Now in Athens, a 77-year-old retired pharmacist left his daughter a suicide note in which he compared the banksters who have kicked out the democratically elected prime minister of Greece with those Greeks who collaborated with the Nazis during World War II. He pointed out how the banksters were stealing people's pensions. In Greece, even though it's a government program, they call it a pension program. The British call it a pension scheme. We call it Social Security. He pointed out that the banksters were stealing people's pensions the same way Republicans have worked to destroy Medicare and Social Security for generations here in the United States. In his suicide note to his daughter, he wrote, this 77-year-old pharmacist who shot himself in the head just a few hundred feet away from Parliament. He said, the occupation government literally, again, occupation, notice he's drawing that parallel to like the occupiers of, the Nazi occupiers. He says, the occupation government literally annihilated any possibility for my survival that depended on a decent pension, which I personally paid for 35 years without any state support. Because my age does not give me the possibility for a dynamic reaction like picking up a Kalashnikov, I see no other solution than the decent end before I start searching in the garbage for food. This is a guy who was old enough to remember what happened to people who collaborated with Hitler, like Mussolini. He ended his suicide note with this. He said, I believe that one day the youth without future, he's talking about the young people today in Greece who are watching this trickle-down austerity wipe out their country, that the youth without future will take up arms and hang the national traitors upside down at Syntagma Square, the same as the Italians did with Mussolini in 1945 in the Piazza Porretto in Milan. End of quote. This all happened only a few hundred yards from the Parliament building and is setting off a whole new round of Greek protests against conservative trickle-down austerity and rule by banksters. Meanwhile, here in the U.S. last year, the Centers for Disease Control reported on a U.S. study of the 20th century that found suicide rates more than doubled during economic disasters like the Republican Great Depression. Bloomberg quoted the study's lead author, Fei-Jun Liu, an economist with the CDC, as saying, economic problems can impact how people feel about themselves and their futures, as well as their relationships with families and friends. It's truly tragic that it takes suicides to show us how destructive trickle-down austerity, conservative austerity programs are. And it's tragic that it's taking a second Republican Great Depression to wake Americans up to the need for a strong social safety net. We have our repeat of the Great Depression's bonus army. It's called the Occupy movement. And suicides are up more and more as more and more people are being thrown out of their houses by banksters or denied health coverage by for-profit health insurance companies. We all need to work to expose the socially destructive nature of these trickle-down austerity programs like those that are being pushed right now by Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney. 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's just amazing. Please identify for me any country that cut its way to prosperity. You can't.